Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm here today with Andrew McKee, who's an Umbrex member, a McKinsey alum. He runs a biotech growth strategy firm called Headland Strategy. But today we're not going to focus so much on that. We're going to focus on a different topic. And I send out, Andrew's also a listener of Unleashed, and I send out a weekly email to listeners of Unleashed. And back in the fall, I included a question in that email of what are you doing to get better at what you do? And Andrew sent me this response, which kind of blew my mind. And I'm going to actually put this response in the show notes so you can check it out. And today we're going to talk about some of the things that Andrew included in that email. So, Andrew, I've been looking forward to this. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Will. A pleasure to be here. Honored to be invited, and always really enjoy being part of the community. So thanks for having me.
So I was like blown away when I saw this list. And listeners, if you kind of read the show notes, you can check it out. Andrew is a busy man. Let me I'm not going to go in order. I'm going to skip around a little bit. But the idea behind this was a blog post from David Perel called "Learn Like an Athlete," and also Tyler Cowan had a post on how I practice at what I do, and I had sent those out asking people who are on that list of what do you do to get better, and you have a big long list. So number one on you broke it out between new things that you're doing new and sustained things ongoing. So I got to ask you about number one on your sustained list was writing literary fiction for 2 to 3 hours a day. Tell me about that a little bit.
Yeah. Thanks, Will. So first is I think there's often a tension between my aspiration and reality when I have things like that. So I think the measured amount that I wrote per weekday in 2020 was about 90 minutes. And that includes like getting horrifically sick in February, which was either COVID that was not confirmed on antibody testing or influenza, more likely. Um, yeah. So how do I do that? Part of it is I make a priority that there's certain things I do want to do, and writing fiction is one of them. And I could probably fill the whole podcast talking about writing fiction, but suffice to say, I'll try to give you the 30-second summaries. I got into writing as a form of healing in the wake of my mother's death a long time ago, and then that sort of snowballed into discovering I liked to just do writing, and then I took some extension classes and just continued to snowball an affirmation that I love to do writing, kind of regardless of the end product or any public reception of it or whatever. And then eventually continue to snowball through getting some paid publications and stuff like that into realizing that I wanted to do fiction, and that because fiction is hard to monetize until you actually have the books done, and because I write in a very slow, bottoms up kind of way, I started work with a professional editor, and I realized that I'll do it part time, but I also have family responsibilities and have other interests which we'll get to, like in science and medicine. So yeah, I kind of got into a rhythm. I mean, there's a period about 5 years ago where I took time off from my work and wrote 50% of my sort of working time, and then it got to a momentum where I could feel good about progress every day with writing with the 2 to 3 hours. So yeah, I would love to. My goal for this year is to get to a solid. I believe it's 2.5 hours. I'm aiming for, 150 minutes. So I don't know if I answered your question. I could talk more about specific tactics I use to like sustain momentum, but I'll pause there.
Yeah, sure. What do you do? It. I'd love to hear those techniques. A certain time of the day or distraction free. How do you go about that? And what are you aiming
Shoot.
towards? Are you kind of trying to work on a novel currently, or a series of short stories, or
Yeah, yeah. Thanks. So the original goal was uncertain, other than that I felt something very intuitive in my heart. I would describe it, and melded with a deep intellectual curiosity around writing. And frankly, I was scared. It took me about 3 years to overcome a lot of hangups I had about writing because though I had taken a lot of really cool English lit classes in like high school and college, I didn't have any degree. I had a lot of like negative baggage around wanting to do something that I didn't have any. I would tell myself earlier, I don't have any credible excuse to be doing this. Why am I doing this? So part of that was just doing it every day, and then thanks to my dear wife's encouragement, I think to do things in a very functional way, I think it's important to seek out positive influence wherever you can find it. So I had, in this case, loved ones, and then I had some close friends, including a friend, since we mentioned McKinsey, like one of my best friends from that time was writing novels in every night. He was a business analyst, and so I started to again build up momentum where life was introducing me to people that had similar interests, and so I'd share ideas with them. Um, yeah. So as far as let me think. So part of it was getting that intrinsic motivation clarified, where in other words, I just did the writing and had to just kind of throw away any expectations around goals or whatever I want to be, what kind of paid piece this is going to be. So I went through a kind of like multi-year process of just doing it without any real goals for what it would do, other than that I was enjoying it, and that because I'd often deal with emotional topics, say around my mother, or a lot of human drama topics, I found it very interesting and very meaningful to do. Um, so let's see, as far as specific tactics right now, so maybe about 6 years ago, it especially when I started to realize, and I guess we'll get into this part of our theme of like lifelong learning. I'd read some books describing deliberate practice that there's a professor Anders Ericsson, it's widely popularized by Malcolm Gladwell, around things one can do to practice deliberate practice. I think that one of the books I read was called Talent is Overrated. And, so a part of the concept there is to have a lot of feedback, right? And ideally through a teacher or a coach. And so in writing, just talking about writing specifically, I went through phases of going to some free or relatively low cost writers workshops. I went to some extension classes with like basically the most highly recommended English professor who taught them, and she was fantastic. And then it just got to a point where, uh, because I'm married, I have three young children, I've got a business. Like I was willing to pay, although it wasn't easy to make the decision at first, but I ultimately decided to hire an editor to give me, every week to sometimes it's every 2 or 3 weeks, depending on how much I have to do, but to give me structured feedback. So that's one. And just interrupt me whenever. I also do some things like I leave myself breadcrumbs. So, um, which means like I often leave if so that I do a lot of dialogue, a lot of drama. So I'll leave a dialogue hanging, like someone asking, like a character asking another character a question, and I'll just stop. And so the next day, there's just this uh, sort of like a vector in the drama. So I don't have to worry about what I have to do. It's just like, all right, I stopped. I'm working on whatever chapter, and character one just asks character two a question. There needs to be an answer, and so I just sort of drop right in, and you don't have to really think about it.
Hmm.
Um, so I do that. Also, jump around a little bit to your question about the whole book idea. Only came about once after I went through a very florid period of just crazy writing output, like roughly in the 2012 to 2015 period, with my editors. She's like a masterful teacher and retired teacher, as well as a very skillful editor. So I kind of just went all over the place in a very constructive, creative way, like characters, their backstories, all these like scenes, again with no real intention of where it would land. And it was after that like multi-year process I realized like wow, I'd like pumped out something like 1 million words, and of course a lot of it was like extremely draft and or but I realized at some point it just qualitatively was like wow, there's like a lot of stuff here, a lot of cool characters, and also my editor thought so too. So it's like let's just roll with this. And I think now it's become a bit more practical. Like I'm writing novels, and it feels like the novel for me right now is the right format because I write human dramas, and there's a bit of a psychological element to them that I hope to make accessible for readers, not dry or academic or anything, but deal with like people's feelings and as they're going through growth and change in their lives, how they process those, how they process difficulty, failure, death, loss, trauma. I deal with a lot of like heavy stuff, um, and very mindful to the human condition. Try to be mindful to the human condition and how we all, I think, have potential to grow and change. So,
All right. Let's go on
Yeah.
to another one. So this is number 11 on your new list. So something that you added, which is added volunteer programs to mentor students at a historically black university, including mock interview practice, career advice, help with career connections, and so on. Tell me about number 11.
Yeah. So the quick backdrop there is, well, maybe it won't be quick, but one of my foundational, probably top three mentors was an African American gentleman who's passed on now. Was a Paul Jeffrey, who's the head of the jazz studies program at Duke University, where I went to college and medical school, and was just a sort of a mentor in on all things life, and someone that I spent a tremendous amount of time with. Like I often worked harder on music, which I didn't ever have a minor or even a major in at Duke. Worked harder on that than my like pre-medical and laboratory and all my sort of like other side of my life. Like I'd spend like super late nights at his house to like 2 or 3 in the morning working on big band arrangements with like 20 parts, or like practice, getting tutored by him as a saxophonist, which is my and his instrument. Um, yeah, so and that which kind of awakened me a lot to a lot of things. This is in the South, and yeah, so for me, it hit a tipping point with George Floyd and so many other people murdered in this country. And I've been a student of a lot of books and history for a long time. It just kind of reached a point where I wanted to do something a little bit more. And I'd even when at Headland, as we've been trying to hire more, and we continue to hire employees, trying to get people from certain minority backgrounds. Um, and I found that like it just didn't always really succeed. So part of it was like to reach out more directly from a hiring and building relationships perspective, and part of it was just out of the desire to give back more, to realizing that there are many people that are not as fortunate as I am, that don't have connections or people to call up when they have a problem or want to change a job, or may not know what options are available when we talk about, say, career planning. Or and then there's also a lot of practical stuff like how to prepare for interviews, how to, the things that like I did and researched when I, for instance, got the job at McKinsey it's already a long time ago, that a lot of these students don't have that kind of awareness of what they could do to present themselves in the best way. So it's both a bit of it's like we want to hire people, so that which I think is a good intention, and also to give back. And we also donated a fair amount of money to um, a few foundations last year. We'll continue to do that. So yeah, that's just trying to add more meaning to what we do as a business, and yeah, at least in our relatively small sphere of influence. So.
And very specifically, can you tell us about which college you're working with, and how practically did it set up? Did they match you with a student, or several students, or sort of how did the practicalities work?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so happy to. Yeah, so it's North Carolina Central, which is also based in Durham, North Carolina, and where I'd had a lot of good personal connections because as a performing musician, and as an aside, I used to be a full-time professional musician, so I used to rehearse with and employ a lot of musicians who were students or alums
Wait,
from
wait a minute. You used to be a professional musician?
yeah.
Oh,
And I think I can proudly say that I still am, because I've rehabilitated in one of COVID 2020 things, I've rehabilitated my saxophone embouchure and wind and stuff. So yeah, I'm still am. But yeah,
that's
so
amazing. So was that like after college, before you went to McKinsey, or tell me about that. Tell me about that just for a
yeah,
minute.
yeah, sure. So well, I grew up playing the saxophone, also piano. I grew up playing the saxophone, and when I got to Duke, it was kind of a surprise that Paul Jeffrey was there, and frankly, was running the jazz program like a conservatory program, in the sense of like it was super intense. It was like you'd have the first rehearsal, and like half the students would just like bail and just never show up again. It was like so intense. Um, and yeah, so and I had always loved music, and it was just right place, right time, the exact kind of teaching I needed. He set an extremely high bar, But it's also as far as you know, being a young man, and I was probably, of course, love dearly my dear father and grandfathers. I think those I still like needing even more male mentors, and he was a phenomenal individual. Like, and to see someone in their 70s when I first met him, playing with, playing in their or performing their art form with a youthful intensity and a kind of a wild intensity of like a 20-something-year-old person was like just blew my mind. I was like, wow, like I want to get like some of what he's got. I mean, it's like, and it's you just didn't see that a lot the way I grew up, as far as again generalizing a bit, but as far as older men and art, I just didn't see that a whole lot, other than my uncle and a few other people. Um, so yeah, so I was basically building this side thing of playing music. I practice and play something like 30 to 40 hours a week, even during college. I kind of went through a slightly, I would not recommend this, like a slightly crazy period where I think in adjusting to the all the trauma with my mother, she had cancer and had a protracted illness before she died. I think I channeled that into a functional way of like working too hard. So instead of maybe dealing with the emotional difficulty, or one of my regrets is not having taken, even I did take time off from school and I was with her a lot and with her when she passed, but I might have even, there are a lot of other things I could have done even more to have, but instead I channeled that into music, and I was like doing all this biomedical engineering research on top of my coursework, and I was sleeping like often 4 to 5 hours a night, which is not healthy, and yeah, so anyway, yeah, I was playing music and it got to a point where my skills were like good enough to play, to get into the local scene in Raleigh, Durham, and yeah, and then I guess it's hard to answer your question quickly, but I was performing a lot and had the privilege to like be like an invited guest on the stage of some really phenomenal saxophonists like Branford Marsalis and Lou Donaldson and others that were in the Raleigh Durham area or coming into town from New York City or elsewhere. And it just got to be a point, I was an MD PhD student, and I was in the lab working on the PhD part of that dual degree program, and feeling like it just wasn't the career path for me. And in the meantime, I was practicing a lot of music. I was doing cool gigs. I was getting into composing music. And so, yeah, and I just got burned out on like all the MD PhD stuff. So I took a leave of absence and made a go at playing professionally full time. So, and I found that I actually really liked it. I love leading bands. I love composing. I loved also from the business side creating an opportunity for like someone to hire us. Like, and because a number of musicians are like, man, don't do that full time. It's going to be such a drag. There are no gigs. But I found if you find like the right kind of event planners and restaurant owners and create a vision with them, then it was actually you could create gigs, and I created like a lot of recurring gigs. So anyway, so that was really fun. At some point, it kind of played itself through, and I realized that there were other things needed to balance, and so that was a struggle for me. It was like I didn't want to really turn my back on all the medical and science stuff, even if I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. I just for a number of reasons. So anyway, that's yeah. So that was, and then the other brief musical summary is that when our children were young, um, I got back into music, or sorry, when our first child was young, so in the 2010 era, for me, I got back into performing. Played in a Bay Area hip hop group called the Get Back, which was a lot of fun. And the musicians and rappers and singers were excellent. And we played some cool gigs like at Yoshi's in San Francisco. And yeah, and then we had two great rap artists, David Diggs and Raphael Casal, who were the front men. David, you may know, it was like his gig before he did Hamilton, so that was like fun. And then I went into hibernation, and it was just for about 10 years. So, but I'm excited to get back into very modest. I want to perform, but just pretty selectively with musicians I love to play with, and not very frequently, and just locally. I'm a family man, and I don't want to do that whole touring thing. But man, it's been great. I mean, I could talk all day about that too, but I got to a point where I was like dreaming about music in the past few years, and like in Technicolor, like hearing the sounds, and you get to a point of playing where it's like I don't have perfect pitch, but like I'd hear like a dream, and I'd be improvising solos, and they're like pitch correct, and like everything was like super vivid. Or I'd have like Paul Jeffrey in my dreams giving me encouragement, not just about music, but about life. I mean, he's such a great guy. So, um, yeah, so I felt like at some point I had to get back into it. And again, it's very modest. Like I play 2 to 3 hours a week total. And I do some like muscle training on the off days to keep my chops in shape. But anyway, yeah,
So
that's a saxophone in a
okay, so
nutshell.
so that's extraordinary. So that's how you got connected to North Carolina State University, and then how did you
Yeah,
get
North
connect
Carolina Central. Yeah.
Central? I'm sorry, and then how did you get connected to the mentoring program, and how does that work? Did you get like paired up one on one, or like tell me a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, great. Yeah, so it's a work in progress. So I've been fortunate to like, let's see, I cold called the head of career development. I think I forget what the office is called. Wonderful woman there at NC Central, um, and just cold called them and said we'd like to do something to collaborate and help out. So it's still a work in progress what we're going to officially do, like, and whether it'll, what we'll do this semester. But I've attended some career panels with students in this STEM degrees, and some like career fair type things. And then so it's still a work in progress, but some of the ideas we're considering are mock interview prep. Some of it's going to be around like career coaching, and yeah, and then in the process reconnected with a high school classmate who also now works for us part time as our HR person at Headland, and she has expertise in helping with like diversity and inclusiveness training, and also helping people who may need additional amount of coaching or career advice. So um, yeah, so work in progress, but I'm excited about where that's going, and yeah.
Let's go to number two on the new list. So, you hired a change coach with psychology and spiritual training to help me vision an inspiring growth trajectory for my consulting business while balancing writing and family priorities. So, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. So I work with a great coach from time to time, and yeah, so I just felt again intuitively that I wanted to think about the right balance, and and I felt like some of it kind of cut to the core of like what are my true priorities? Because I mean, it's fun to have like all these interests like I do, but it also can get like you can get stretched too thin, right? You can sometimes just have no buffer. So if one of the various things I'm juggling goes awry, it's like that tumbles into everything else, right? There's like not a lot of spare time. Um, so yeah, she's an excellent coach. I highly recommend her. Share her name later. Um, the last time I worked with her was when it was during the Great Recession, where or no, actually, I worked with her first when I was thinking about quitting my job at Genentech, and that was bringing up a lot of uncertainty about what my priorities were, how I would make money, et cetera, et cetera. And so she was foundational for that. And then, yeah, so I've been work with her off and on to explore and clarify the vision for Headland, because and that's also, I'd say, still a work in progress, because we haven't necessarily seen models of what kind of firm we want to build. That being said, we're not like it's not like revolution. Like we're many aspects of how we're structured as a firm, it's like a consulting firm, is not too out of the ordinary. But we wanted it from a sort of values and the kinds of services we provide and the kind of growth trajectory. Wanted to like think all that through thoughtfully. So I felt like I needed, um, yeah, again, I'm kind of a doer if it's not obvious, and it's nice to have. And I'm practicing as I continue to get older, like getting advice from skillful people. And so I work with the coach from time to time, not consistently. I like to kind of do it in a sort of spot way. Like if I got a major thing I'm sorting through, I'll work with someone for like 3 to 6 months or something like that. And then similarly, we've started to hire like occasional advisors to Headland Strategy Group that have experience, like extensive experience in healthcare, or and or have built professional services firms like Headland, themselves, and so they can just give me a lot of words of wisdom. So yeah, it's part of that broader theme of seeking advice more often than I have in the past.
Number 3 on your sustained list is no alcohol since 2013 or other drugs.
Hmm.
Tell me about your decision to stop drinking alcohol.
Sure. So a few parts. One was in the wake of my mom's death, and then a breakup with a girlfriend. There's a lot of sadness going on, and I, admit that self-medicated with uh, drinking. I didn't become an alcoholic or anything, but it was just a lot of beer and all that. So I had like a lot of negative association with that time period. I want to move on from that. Second was I got into meditation about 13 years ago, also in response to like dealing with um, the my mother, when she passed away, did not pass away peacefully, and it was not only the trauma of her death at the time, as she basically suffered from like oxygen hunger, as sort of like a suffocation like situation. But even before that, there's just a lot of difficulties in my family around her, like extended family around her illness, and because she was quite an amazing woman and was sort of like the glue of the family. And as she got sicker, a lot of like skeletons in the closet, so to speak, came out between other family members, and there's like a ton of, a lot of animosity and negative emotions going down. Um, so I got into meditation, and that, over the time that I've been into it, I started to become more aware of things, as you do, as one does when you build that kind of practice. And I started to realize that when I drink beer, which I generally preferred, although I also like red wine, that it would be great for like the first gulp or two, and then the diminishing returns were like really became really obvious to me after I sort of studied it for a few months, which is like, especially with like certain kinds of foods, spicy food, etc. It'd be great to drink a glass of beer, excuse me, to have a gulp or two of beer, and then after that, I was just like, and then I would get more forgetful than I already am, and I'm slightly absent-minded at baseline, right? And then of course, if you ever get drunk, then you have all these really undesirable, uh, obvious side effects that everyone knows about. So yeah, it just felt like that was kind of a second reason, just studying how I felt. The third was like, I mean, I have a tendency to be too serious, but it was kind of like, if I can be relaxed, then I don't need like a drink of alcohol to relax me. Or it was kind of like a little challenge, like maybe I can try over some arbitrary period of time. Can I just relax and laugh without having a drink first? Um, so that's like a third one, and I found that I mostly can, although it's still a work in progress. And then the fourth was, I think, just from like the nutritional side of things, like just, and I can't remember if beer labels now share how much sugar it is, just like a crazy amount of like empty carbs every bottle of beer or wine or whatever. So I just felt like that was just, I want to stay fit as get older, and that just seemed like silly too. And then the fifth, which was not a reason at the time, but now with a lot of evidence behind it, now that I've read some books around the clinical evidence around healthy sleep, is that pretty much alcohol, caffeine are two of the like worst things you can drink um, to disrupt your sleep. And I read a book called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. Highly recommend it. It's just a great readable summary of all the latest evidence, which I did not learn in medical school. Just it kind of came out after I finished med school. Just fantastically interesting studies about a lot of controlled studies with people going to sleep labs where they drink alcohol of certain amounts or get a blood alcohol level of a certain amount, and then they go to sleep, and the control group doesn't, or they do, it's really interesting stuff. So yeah, those are like the five reasons why I've stopped drinking. And I occasionally miss like a really bold glass of Syrah from time to time. And yeah, I'm half Hungarian, and there seems to be like this, just robust desire I occasionally have for like a really heavy hitting glass of red wine. But I just kind of noticed that feeling and let it go. And I do drink some non-alcoholic beer from time to time, so technically I get a little bit of alcohol in those. But yeah, anyway, that's my thing with alcohol.
And you cut out caffeine as well. So more recently in 2019.
That's right. That was more recent. Had one of Headland had a wonderful a former intern who she and her husband were really into like living healthily in all sorts of ways, and they both have scientific background, and they got me into checking out an Oura Ring, which I highly recommend, and helped me think a lot more about my sleep because I would tend to like work too late
Mm.
and not get enough sleep, but also got me to into some of this latest thinking about caffeine that kind of referred to. Um,
And what's the Aura Ring?
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. Oura Ring. Oura. It's a wearable ring that includes has like a step tracker, but its main kind of claim to fame is that they use, I think it's like finger movement plus infrared sensors that sense the blood flow in the ring in the finger you wear it
Hmm.
on, that then they use to calculate a lot about the stages of sleep. And so you get a feedback every morning whether you had light, deep, or REM stage of sleep, whether you got enough sleep. Kind of becomes a bit of a personal sleep coach because it'll tell you how much you got and try to give you some feedback, like maybe you should exercise more today, or it'll be like, oh, you worked out a lot yesterday, so you should take it easy today. They give you a lot of cool reminders. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that. Um, and not to like name drop too much, but a friend and also former McKinsey colleague Peter Attia, he has this podcast, The Drive, which I like when I have the time to listen to it, and he also got into the Aura Ring, and so I checked it out 2 years ago and I really liked it. So caffeine was basically I had a few friends who were like weaning themselves off caffeine, even avowed coffee lovers were doing this. And so that was one thing that had basically coworkers encouraged me to try to do no caffeine. And then I also, when I was going to go to a Zen center for some time to meditate and do some like kind of like manual labor, basically. Although that maybe I shouldn't describe it like that, but like I voluntarily want to do a lot of like kind of construction and fix it kind of stuff, and outside digging ditches and stuff like that. And then it's this cool nearby center where if they have a work week, it's called, once a year, and if you do that, then you can stay and partake in meals and join any meditation sessions. So I did that for a few days while my wife and kids were um, on a trip that I was going to join them later, and I was a little worried that they wouldn't have coffee. It turned out to be an irrational concern, but I was a little worried that they wouldn't have coffee or green tea. Um, it turned out I probably could have just asked, right? Or the reality was they actually had like almost every kind of morning beverage you could imagine.
Okay.
Like, but maybe I was like I had this anterograde or like anticipatory fear that I would have a coffee headache, which I don't like the feeling of. So I weaned myself off, I think, by like half a cup a day until it was down to zero. And yeah, I have to say, I don't know if I really noticed any difference because I wasn't a heavy coffee drinker before. I always had like 1 to 2 cups in the morning only. And a lot of the latest science at a high level suggests you should never have coffee in the afternoon or later because it might depend a little bit, but most people, almost everyone, like processes it out of their system in sort of like a 7 to 10 hour time scale or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, don't quote me on the exact pharmacology there, but yeah, so I drink decaf coffee or like 1 cup of green tea, so there's a bit of caffeine. But yeah, so I guess the other thing is occasionally, like not right now with COVID, but we'd often go to Japan because of uh, my wife and her family are there, I have business, we have customers in Japan, and yeah, it's a real drag to like go to hot time zones and have to like deal with some caffeine headache or jack yourself up on all this caffeine and then yeah, it's just like a nightmare when you start doing multi-time zone traveling to have to deal with the caffeine factor. So I'm like glad to be done with it, but I still do like the taste of decaf coffee. But yeah, and I kind of like actually not having to like sweat the whole. Yeah, if I forget to have a cup of coffee, I won't get a headache, and I don't have to like deal with all this fancy coffees and stuff like that. I mean, not that a lot of them taste great, but I kind of simplify my life a bit. So
on number 5 on your new list is doing Zoom hip hop dance classes with my daughters, and that was back in September. Is that still going or?
Still going, yeah. Yeah, there's so many challenging things, as we all know right now with COVID. One of the few silver linings has been, I hope for many folks, to found some positives, or discovering things we never knew we liked, or rediscovering old hobbies or talents or passions that have fallen by the wayside in life. Yeah, so it's my oldest daughter. One of her favorite things is like hip hop dancing, and then I've always loved dancing, and yeah, it just became a cool father-daughter bonding thing where we I guess I'll give a shout out to Mike Peel, who has this YouTube channel, Hip Hop Fit, um, which we almost exclusively do. Sometimes his workout's a little too intense for our skill level, but um, he's just super positive. It's challenging, and usually the grooves and the moves are like we just totally dig them. So it's like, yeah. So we've sustained that. I'd say I even put up a chart on a refrigerator of like our kids. We have 3 kids and what their passions or sort of interest areas are, and I even put like a little like I don't think anyone really cares other than me, but it's nice for me to have it up there and remind myself in case I get really caught up with work or whatever that like, oh yeah, I'm gonna dance hip hop with my oldest daughter. And yeah, so it's almost, I'd say 80% of the time we do it Monday nights, and it's quite enjoyable. Yeah, and again, I feel like, not to kind of wax off topic too much, but I feel like especially for people who maybe listen to this podcast, like a lot of like so-called office work or white collar work, it's like there's a lot that's missing in work, right? There's a lot of physicality and creativity that's missing, and so I felt like for a long time I needed to dance in some way, shape, or form. And even if I didn't care, I mean, I can keep time quite well, but I can't profess to be a highly skilled dancer. Um, but it was just fun, to just move to the rhythm and to get that sort of more non-mental, very physical energy into the day. So yeah, we look forward to that.
So number 8 on your new list is calling my father more regularly. And I'll interject here, which is last year I started something with my dad pre-COVID where we did a series of interviews. I basically interviewed him the same as I would a podcast guest, and we did it kind of by period of his life. So we did like a call on elementary school, and then next week we did middle school, high school, college, his couple years in the army, and then grad school, and then moving to Connecticut, and different aspects of being a dad, and so forth. And so we did about 10 or 12 of those, and
Wow.
it was so awesome. As opposed, I mean, it's great to just catch up in general, but it was a really nice, I found, to have to do that kind of structured thing, because just calling up and saying hello, maybe you have something to say like what's new, whatever. Have you been to the doctor lately? How are you doing? And did you shovel the snow or something? But it was really nice to kind of go through that, go through his life. And even though I've known him my whole life, heard stories that I just never heard before when we did that. I'd love to hear about how you've been calling your dad, and the kinds of and what you've been doing to make that more regular, and how that experience has been.
Yeah, thank you, Will, and it's great to hear about your own father. Um, yeah, so it's still a bit haphazard, but I found there are a few things I do outside the house, like for whatever reason, mail forwarding wasn't like it's never been reliable, so I need to go to our office periodically, which is in San Francisco, like the main office, and get the mail, and so talk with him. I think also we just heard a lot of complaints from our kids, like if I talk too much about so-called grown-up topics. I mean, we always try to be mindful of like what we say in front of the kids, but to just talk about COVID or like business stuff in a way that I can talk openly with him in and not have the kids around. So it's been nice to have that privacy. I was actually very inspired by your having done that with your dad. I've been thinking about doing something similar, and I've done some oral history interviews with other family members, like my Hungarian relatives, for instance, and my my dad's dad. I did like 6 or 7 hours of interviews with him, similar to what you're describing, like different parts of his life. Yeah, so I would like to do that with my dad, and I'm hoping that I'll get either. I mean, he just got immunized to COVID, so maybe we'll be able to see him soon. Lives on the East Coast, um, and or as our youngest kid is 4, and the kids are getting to a point where I could like carve out a bit more time on a weekend to do that. But yeah, I always have loved interviewing people, and would very much love to do that. But I have not taken it to that level. But I think with your inspiration combined with my own passions, I think I'll do that fairly soon.
Number 6 on your new list was sending more emotionally vulnerable emails to my close guy friends about the ups and downs in life and having more one-on-one phone calls where I stop beating around the bush. Talk to me about just like having guy friends and being more emotionally open with them. It's something that I think a lot of us maybe don't do as much of and feel the need for. But tell me about your experience doing that.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Well, I'll start with a general comment because I've read a number of books and taken some courses on psychology, including men and women. Really fascinating statistic that across cultures from some very large studies, men and women have no difference in the ability to discern or detect emotions. Like we show like photographs of people, different facial expressions and so forth. So in other words, regardless of whatever conditioning the men have as boys and adults, they still have that a sensibility for emotions at our core. And it didn't, yeah. So with that sort of blanket comment, um, I think, in other words, I think a lot of why men don't connect is more from habit and or whatever examples they're working off of, rather than something sort of genetic or hardwired. Yeah. So I guess with there's just so much stress right now, right, with coronavirus, and then regardless of political affiliation, like there's just a lot of stress in the national news in the U.S., local news, all sorts of bad things. We have, fortunately, we didn't have anybody in our immediate family, but we had some like extended family members die from COVID, and the kids have been really stressed with like remote school, um, as opposed to being in person. And yeah, it's just a ton of stress. So I don't know. That part was just a practical thing that if I was and being a busy person, it's like if I have an hour to catch up with some close friends, I would feel bad if I had something weighing on me that I wanted to like share and unpack with a kind friend, and I didn't tell them. I just feel like disingenuous to myself and disingenuous to my friends if I didn't say that. The second is I've sadly known a number of people, men and women, but I think of the men I know who have committed suicide, who have been, by all outward measures, successful in every element of what our so-called, I don't know, vague American dream defines as successful, like status, money, blah blah blah, and then they kill themselves, and it just reminds me that, and then on a less severe note, they're like people that, uh, you know, I guess it troubles me when people are having difficulties in their lives and they can't talk to anybody about it, or don't think they can. And so I want to try to, even though it's uncomfortable, to share that more with friends. I guess also I should caveat that I'm fortunate to have a few close guy friends that I've known for a long time since college, and we bonded over music as well as other shared interests. And I consider them to be like really close brothers, like almost like blood relatives. We didn't bond by drinking lots of alcohol or anything like that, which I think is a sort of a false way to bond. I think we built a sort of multi-dimensional, multi-layered friendships where I could trust these guys with my life, and I would have already built up a habit of talking pretty openly about pretty much everything in life. So, but it was just a reminder that, yeah, even with those close friends, sometimes we can just beat around the bush and talk about practical matters, and then our hour is gone, and we go back to our lives. And yeah, it's just a realization I had. It's like I have to be intentional. It's okay. I think chatter and chit chat has its place, right? That's one way people warm up when we're having conversations with one another. But I realize I kind of, not to be too directed about it, but I want to, if I have something's really bothering me, I want to make sure I get it off my chest in that call. And then and I think I roughly have like 6 or 7 guy friends who I've kept in touch with over the years. I have learned, by the way, that's the thing guys often do is like they don't keep, they often associate their friendships. So they only keep in touch with like, well, if it's that's like the hockey team friend. Well, if I'm not playing hockey with him, then I don't really talk with him. And that's like, and I don't mean to sound dismissive of that. That's apparently, from what I've read, a very common behavior that men have. And so I try to pretty intentionally, so I've keep reaching out to friends that I knew from previous jobs, previous musical or sports association, you know, and I think, again, speaking in generalities, but women on average, from what I've read in various studies, do that a lot better. They can, on average, much better at building lifelong friendships. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what was going on for me there.
Yeah, it does answer it, Andrew. And I think that's a great kind of place to close of a reminder to us to reach out and phone a friend, and just check in with people, now during COVID, but always. It's just to kind of, and not just wait till the hockey game, right? Or the sports event, or the thing that you typically do with that person, but just check in with people. And it's been an extraordinary conversation. Listeners, you can find the full list in the show notes, and I'll also include a link to Andrew's website for his firm, so you can check out a little bit more professionally what his firm is doing. Andrew, I can't thank you enough. This was really an extraordinary conversation. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Will. It was a pleasure. Yeah, thanks again.